policymakers are deliberating on laws and regulations that will govern AI and the privacy considerations around its use. Researchers need to understand and follow these laws and regulations to ensure their work is consistent with new legal rules, and to identify the areas where research innovation can help drive compliance with these laws. This includes understanding how international standards can help streamline compliance, and learning how to engage and collaborate with organizations like Partnership on AI to catalyze innovations in practice and policy. In the upcoming panel discussion, our panelists explore these issues. Jeff Brown, who's an Associate General Counsel for Privacy and Regulatory Affairs at Microsoft, moderates a discussion on the mutually influential relationship between privacy research and public policy. In addition, Rebecca Finley, CEO of the nonprofit Partnership on AI, will speak about her organization's unique approach to advancing knowledge and informing policy and practice. She'll share some of their privacy-related research, including recent work on algorithmic fairness and demographic data, and a synthetic media code of conduct. I'll hand over to Jeff now.
Hello, welcome to our panel, From Privacy Research to Policy, Regulations, and Standards. We have a great panel to discuss this issue, and I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I will hand it over first to Rebecca Finlay from the Partnership on AI to introduce herself, and then pass on to Cornelia Ketterer and Peter Castleman, both from Microsoft.
Hello. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion about privacy, trust, and artificial intelligence. I'm Rebecca Finley, the CEO of the Partnership on AI, and my career has really been focused on building multi-stakeholder partnerships to advance research and technology for social change. AI and its implications for people and society became a central focus of my work at CFAR. I built on CFAR's longstanding leadership and research into deep learning and neural networks, and really identified the need to bring social scientists, legal scholars, policymakers, others into the conversation. And out of that came an international AI and society program. The role of the CEO at Partnership on AI really combines both my passion for building international multi-stakeholder coalitions and the need to ensure that AI systems advance enduring positive outcomes for people and society. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, and thank you again for inviting me to be here today.
Thank you, Rebecca. Glad you're here. You've got a wonderful background there. Moving to Cornelia, you've worked in the policy space for a long time. Tell us about yourself and what your thoughts are on the policy issues today.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for inviting me to this research summit. I'm a big fan of Microsoft Research, so this is exciting to talk here. My background is I'm a lawyer. I'm working in the European Government Affairs team of Microsoft based in Brussels. I'm Senior Director for Responsible Tech and Competition. And my team works on all regulatory files spanning from privacy to lawful access, responsible AI, safety, content regulation, and human rights. I have always felt that the work between those who work directly on the policy developments and research needs to go hand in hand, and I'm super excited that this is the topic of today's discussion.
Sounds excellent. And Peter, you've done a lot of really interesting work in a number of areas in research. Can you just tell a little bit about yourself and what you're bringing to the discussion today?
Certainly. So thanks again for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. Right now, I'm a member of the Microsoft Identity Standards team, and I'm an identity standards architect working on all the emerging standards that is really sort of trying to tackle some of the most challenging issues around identity. And identity is actually one of these really enabling concepts and technologies, but one of the challenges that comes with identity is, although on the one end we really need to know who we're working with, on the other end making sure that we manage to preserve privacy and leave users in control of their information is really critical. And so really looking at that from the standards perspective, and our team is really focused on different aspects of that. And so that's really my area of focus at the moment.
Thanks, Peter, and it's a very interesting one and very timely. Let me start the conversation by asking you, Cornelia, to give us a framework for why we're so concerned about regulations and policy changing, what's developing, especially in Europe, but really not just in Europe, but around the world, in response to policy concerns about AI, to set the stage for what we need to do as researchers.
Yeah, I think that there has been a change in the developments overall when it comes to data. When you think about GDPR and data protection per se, it has been always about data minimization as the tool in order to protect personal data. But of course, with AI and the recognition that there's so much value in data sharing and insights of data for tackling important problems, there has been real efforts in regulation to overcome this. And so now you see in various regulations the necessity to share data, whether this is in the context of competition, whether this is in the context of health data regulation, or in the context of AI regulation, where we need data to protect against biases, for example. We have these tensions, these value tensions in these regulatory obligations. So the trend here is really to focus on how to improve the use of the data through privacy-preserving machine learning or privacy-enhancing technologies in order to overcome that. So we can really see that there is an increasing attention to these techniques as we see. I can go into a little bit more detail. I'll stop here, but this is sort of how I would frame this as a starting point.
And one thing that we've been talking about internally is some of these policy considerations are turning into legal requirements. There's a legal infrastructure. Do you see trends in that area that we in the research community should be aware of?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, there's first of all, I'll give you a couple of examples. When you think about the European AI Act, there is a new set of regulation or a new set of obligations when it comes to data governance, how to have documentation and the ability of authorities to review the use of the data, what type of data is collected, etc. At the same time, these new rules need to be in conformity with the data protection rules that are already existing. And so you will see always a link that really focuses in on making sure that you use the data in a privacy-preserving way. So you will see that there will be more focus on this, and there will be more discussions around what that really means. To give you one example, the European Data Protection Board is going to provide more guidance now on what anonymization means. And in this context, there is a lot of discussion, again, on privacy-preserving and privacy-enhancing technologies. So this is not the only area where we see this, but these are some examples in how these discussions are currently evolving.
It's really interesting. You mentioned the European Data Protection Board, and I know there are other regulators who are looking at this, trying to figure out how to pivot from a data protection environment where data minimization was the key thing to a new environment where data and using data is understood to be important but has to be done right. What can researchers do to help policymakers come to the right conclusions as they pivot their thinking on these issues?
I think in Europe specifically, a lot of policy considerations really start with research. There is huge research programs. The Commission in particular is funding in order to advance these type of discussions. So for researchers, they should be in those discussions. We really need to bridge the academic research towards these policy discussions and really make it understandable for people with not the same background to understand the benefits of these privacy-preserving techniques that are currently developed and that are very promising for advancing sort of these additional goals, be it like secondary use of health data or being able to limit biases in data sets, or just to provide transparency, frankly, in other areas, such as in the context of, what companies do when they remove or demote content of users. So there's plenty of these types of new data sharing needs that need to be addressed. So, and the earlier there is understanding, and there is an understanding that needs to be part of the policy consideration, the better it is.
I think that what you said about making it understandable is so important, because research can be very complicated, and sometimes after you read the first few paragraphs in a paper, it starts to get very mathematically focused, or it requires an understanding of the literature. And really taking the information that we as researchers have, and I say we, researchers, I'm a lawyer as well, but researchers have, and then understanding how to make that real to policymakers who are struggling with these issues, I think is hugely important. Another question I have is really for somebody who's starting out thinking about research projects, or maybe is early in career as a researcher, and they're wondering, what are the topics that are going to be interesting in this area? And I'm thinking, you read about facial recognition and facial recognition technologies, but are there examples, if that's one or others, where you would say that policymakers are going to be really focused in the coming years in this space that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, facial recognition is definitely one of them. It's certainly not the only one. I think when you go, so in the context of AI, there will be other areas that are just as significant in the intrusion of privacy, and for non-Europeans sometimes it's important to say that we are talking about data protection on one hand and privacy on the other hand. So anything around advertising, for example, and the use of data in this context is certainly important. Anything that relates to how inferences can be made of data in relation to data that has been shared is important. Data sharing more generally, allowing different organizations to share data without necessarily sharing the content specifically, but the insights of the data. This is important. So there is numerous of these areas that I think are currently in the discussion. Let me eventually just also say an additional point that I think is important, and to follow up on what I was saying, that it has to be understood. It's also true that authorities are becoming more tech savvy, so that will hopefully help in the future to have more corporations. I think the corporation is in particular seeing these policymakers of being in the same boat, and early on engage with the work that is going that might solve some of these really difficult problems. I think is really important.
That's great to hear. It's great to hear that the policymakers are getting more educated about it, and that there's a whole range of things that we as the research community can drill into and help with on that. It's a positive message for the future. I'd like to turn to Peter, because you're sort of in the front line on this, looking at it in the context of identity work, and specifically with respect to the work you're doing on identity, what are the things that relate to policy and privacy in particular that are intersecting with your work, and how are you addressing that?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that really sort of comes to the fore. I think with identity, one of the things that we believe in is we want to make sure that we find ways to leave our customers in control of their own data. And consequently, we're investing in a whole set of standards and even products at this point that will enable that, right? Which is a whole new paradigm shift. So there is a whole set of technologies being developed around things like selective disclosure and of course the user experiences around that, right? Allowing users to figure out what to disclose and when they're disclosing things. So that's one area. I think another one is the whole space around identity proofing. And this is where we start touching on technologies like biometrics. I think Cornelia mentioned biometrics and facial recognition specifically. And so that's another area where it's an incredibly useful and powerful technology in helping establish identity and verifying identity. But then I think the other part of it is, how do we put the checks and balances in place? Right? What are the controls that we put in place to prevent these very useful technologies for identity verification? How do we prevent that from turning into surveillance systems of some sort, whether it's for commercial or other uses? And so really figuring out how we come up with technologies, how do we come up with standards that can be referenced by policymakers, and also working with policymakers, right? And I term this the expertise elsewhere problem. We are technologists, we're not policymakers. And how do we translate our technologies, and how do we translate the technology into a language that policymakers can understand, but also how do we translate policy into language that technologists can understand, right? So I think that need for translation, and I think you, Jeff, you also mentioned, right, you want to avoid having to become a mathematician to understand the technology, right? And so figuring out how do we strike that balance is really important. So I think those are sort of some of the things that we really see. I think actually at Microsoft we're very fortunate, right? I think from the way we look at our customers and data protection, we're trying to provide a platform for people to develop and deliver their services on. But still, I think one of the other challenges that we're also seeing is the emergence of multiple trust frameworks around technologies or around identity. So one of the things that we see, is that there are these ideas of trust frameworks, which is really the combination of technology and policy emerging, say, within national frameworks, within regions, but also within vertical industries, right? And then I think one of the other challenges that we see with that is, how do we make sure, or what should we do to make sure that those trust frameworks become interoperable as well? And I think we can sort of talk more about that, but that's kind of a really important problem for us to figure out, is if we have a trust framework A and a trust framework B, and we need to merge or converge those two. How do we do that, and how do we do that in a way that still preserves privacy? I think I've talked about this before, right? I think during the pandemic, one of the things that became very critical was that there's trust frameworks around travel, right? Your travel documents, things like that. And then there is trust frameworks around healthcare, right? What's your vaccination status and so forth. And suddenly at very short notice, those things needed to become, had to be merged, right? And it turned out to be a really big challenge. And I think we're going to just see more and more of that. So figuring out, how do we get these different trust frameworks across industries, across national boundaries, or across geographies, and how do we make them interoperable, and how do we do that in a way that is cognizant of the privacy promises of each of the trust frameworks as well? So I think that there's some really big challenges, but really some really great opportunities for us as well in this space.
That's right. And Peter, when we've talked, what's been interesting to me is how something like identity, which seems like just something that's in the background, can really have privacy risks, and it can really have societal benefits. And I wanted to drill into each of those. And you mentioned a bit about the pandemic and how we saw the need for interoperability across different trust frameworks to work. But can you talk a little bit about some of the privacy risks? You mentioned surveillance. You mentioned some of the concerns about governments using that data. Can you sort of make that, tell us a bit more about how that could be a real risk and what we should be worried about there?
Well, I think one of the risks really, I look at biometric technology, face recognition specifically, as one of those where a very common thing these days, right, for anti-money laundering purposes and anti-terrorist financing purposes, it's really impossible to open a bank account these days without going through some kind of process of uploading a document and providing a picture of yourself, a selfie, and having that verified by a service. And that's essentially face recognition technology on the back end that's doing a match between this document and the biometric data in the document and your face. And of course, there's a bunch of other work that happens around just document verification in general. That same technology can also be used in surveillance settings. And so the question becomes, how do we think about that from a technology perspective? How do we get the benefit of having, well-ordered society? How do we prevent these things like money laundering and terrorist financing without, having that technology used for other purposes? And I think this is where some of the work that we've done in standards, or that's emerging in standards organizations, in ISO specifically, is really sort of breaking new ground, right? Where it is beginning to put management systems around these technologies, expectations, and really sort of the control systems and the auditability and the transparency. And there are so many other challenges just beyond privacy even, right, around diversity and inclusion when it comes to facial recognition. And really, I think this is a place where standards play a really crucial role in setting a bar that can be used and then can be referenced. And so certainly I think that whole space, that is one of them that is a challenge. I think the other one that I think is the other space around privacy and these trust frameworks is also just when is it okay to share data, right? And how do we inform customers, end users, who are not experts at privacy either, right? They do not always understand what they're trading off. It's what I call, again, right, the expertise elsewhere problem. There may be doctors, they may, these are folks who are highly skilled in their areas. How do we make it so that they can make good decisions about privacy, their own privacy, their customers' privacy, and how do we make sure that the promises, right, when I opt into a travel scheme, right, how do I make sure that when that data doesn't get reused in some other way, in some unexpected way that I hadn't anticipated, right? So figuring out ways how we leave the end user in control of their data, and how do we help them make good decisions about that data? I think those are some of the big challenges and some of the big opportunities.
Big challenges, but you mentioned the big opportunities, especially when you think about the pandemic and the ability to combine data across travel and medical in order to look for things that will help people and save their lives. Is real power there. I'm also very interested in the way you spoke about standards, that standards can be a way to have these discussions in a rigorous way, or standards community can be a place to have these discussions in a rigorous way, and then perhaps have those standards get adopted by policymakers, so you have a way of conveying information in a structured way from the research community through to the policymakers and eventually into regulations and laws. That sounds super interesting.
And I think to add to that, Jeff, I think one of the things we're beginning to see is that the standards are also being developed in response to policy or in conjunction with policy. And I think that part is the part that excites me the most. And I think that opportunity to do sort of the back and forth, right, around what is technologically possible and then what is desirable from a policy perspective, I think that is going to serve us really well as a pattern going forward.
It brings in the concepts of multidisciplinary and multi-stakeholder and interdisciplinary work. And as I say those words, I'm looking at Rebecca because I know that's the center of where the Partnership on AI is, in bringing these different voices together. So I guess the question directly to you is, how do you, leading the Partnership on AI, think about these issues, and how does the Partnership on AI as an organization support it?
Thanks very much. Yes, I have to tell you, listening to you, Cornelia, and to you, Peter, really emphasizing these notions of trust frameworks and bridging and translation and the need to connect with expertise elsewhere. Those are all concepts that are top of mind for us at the Partnership on AI. As you probably know, we were really founded on this fundamental belief that we need to bring diverse voices, we need to bring diverse perspectives together if we're going to make change happen. It was with that motivation in mind that Microsoft, under the extraordinary leadership of Eric Horvitz, came together in 2016, 2017 with 5 other technology companies, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, Google, IBM, and several civil society organizations such as the ACLU and the MacArthur Foundation, as well as researchers in academia and institutions around the world to create the Partnership on AI. And I think they really understood 2 core elements of the conversation we've been having. First, that questions emerging about the implications for AI in society were bigger than any one organization could tackle on their own. And second, that these questions required a collective approach. It needed to be independent, it needed to be socio-technical, it needed to be multi-stakeholder right from the start. And now here we are in 2022, and in many ways the field of AI ethics and society has probably grown more rapidly than we probably even would have imagined back in 2017. And I have been using the opportunity lately to refer to this recent report out of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine around responsible computing research, around sort of ethics and governance of computing research and its applications. It came out of work that was chaired by Barbara Grosz. There's an impressive interdisciplinary team of experts that came together. But I was really impressed by how centrally they placed the questions of the need for a socio-technical approach to the computing research in general and AI more specifically. And they have many, many recommendations that come out of the report, but they have sort of 3 conclusions. And that was clearly that for computing research to be responsible, it needed to be expanded to include these considerations of ethics and societal impact, and really to take responsibility for thinking about ways to address them, and that needed to engage a full spectrum of stakeholders, that really needed to think about the complicated social dynamics. And then finally, with regard to policy, then I think this is very similar, Cornelia, to what you were saying, that for researchers in the field of computing technologies to really assist in trying to make sure to share their research results and any of the implications therein with policymakers, so that governments were well positioned to establish policies and regulations. So I just feel like those 3 conclusions establish such important guideposts for all of us who are in the AI research and policy community. And when you add that to the fact that we're seeing a speed and scale of development and investment in AI really that's unheard of in previous years, it really creates context for how do we better work together as a collective community. And of course, that's exactly where PAI is placed, and that is exactly why we were founded in the first place. So today we bring together about 100 international partners. We're in about 14 countries, and really we want to work together to study and advance AI that centers people first. And it really, we have a roadmap that really sort of thinks about the way in which we can make change. And I heard this in consultations with partners over the last year as we went through our strategic planning process. So first and foremost, timely convenings. How do we create those spaces for diverse stakeholders to come together, to identify sort of those emerging topics and trend, to really think about the possibilities as well as the significant potential harm. and then to really drive that work into high quality, accessible, relevant resources, tools, and recommendations. So this whole notion of translating the research that's happening within academia and within industry into tangible products and solutions that can change practice, that can inform public policy and advance understanding. And then at the end of the day, we need to really think about how as a field we're accountable. We're tracking our progress, we're identifying where we need to be improving the work that we're doing. And in these three ways, how can PAI really drive that work? And I'd love to talk to you about some of the specific work we're doing, but really that's the core concept behind the organization.
No, it's super valuable, and everything you said really resonates with what we've been talking about in this panel. So I am really interested in some of the privacy-related research that the Partnership on AI is engaged in right now, and learning a little bit more on the details there would be super to be interested. It'd be interesting to hear that.
Yeah, happy to jump into that, and I'll focus on one particular area, but offer up some of the other things that we're doing. And I'll begin by acknowledging just personally how salient the issue of privacy became for me. You may have seen that I put out a statement to the broader AI community following the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, and this whole notion that many individuals would have thought of personal or professional information not being highly sensitive in nature, and the recognition that now it may be much more risky for individuals in different jurisdictions as changes were underway with regard to this longstanding right to medical services. And of course, this isn't new. Peter, you mentioned this as well, the way in which different regimes could use information against different communities. We've certainly seen the way in which algorithms and data have been deployed against communities of color. But it just really highlighted for me the urgency for the AI research community to really double down and think about privacy protection. And as I know you've all seen, we've really seen a remarkable development of resources and advice being shared by many members of the AI community, the Center for Democracy and Technology, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Mozilla Foundation, really coming to with really some thoughtful advice about what does it mean to protect our privacy and our data in this new world. Some of the work that we've been doing specifically related to privacy is focusing on that challenge, Cornelia, that you talked a little bit about the balance between collecting more demographic data in order to be more algorithmically fair and protecting privacy at the same time. And this is a work stream we call demographic data and algorithmic fairness. It's led by Sarah Villeneuve and until recently McCain Andrus. And so they've been pulling together this expert group of stakeholders from across the community to put together a white paper that really attempts to sort of outline both the risks associated with using demographic data to drive algorithmic fairness and also some of the trade-offs therein. And clearly the privacy is one of those real concerns in this work. So of course we well know the risks of breaching an individual's privacy by collecting or using sensitive information as we collect more and more attributes about them, and the risks of discrimination therein, and also the risks of trying to re-identify individuals and the way in which technologies and new forms of research are trying to come up with experimental approaches to de-identify or anonymize data. But the third area, which I think is quite interesting, particularly for policymakers and for this panel, is thinking about the connection between privacy of individuals and privacy of groups. And this is based on work done by Salam Barakis at Microsoft and Cornell and Karen Levy at Cornell, who refer to these associations as privacy dependencies. This notion that machine learning and AI systems are built with the intention of generalizing across groups. Therefore, one could be able to simply match patterns of behavior in order to therefore categorize individuals within certain groups. And to date, most of the privacy regulation we've seen has really focused on an individual's right to privacy and agency over their personal data. And I think one of the areas that we would really be encouraging the community to look at is this relational notion between an individual's privacy and group privacy, media. We've held some workshops around informed consent and its usefulness and challenges therein as a framework for moving this work forward. But that's just sort of one example of the questions that I know many people on this panel and beyond are thinking about around privacy, algorithmic fairness more generally.
That's really interesting, Rebecca, and super timely. I guess my only other final question is, how can a researcher get engaged with the Partnership on AI in order to get these benefits?
Absolutely. Lots of ways to engage with us. I'll mention two in particular. So another area of work that we've been undertaking has been specifically focusing on synthetic media. And Peter, you mentioned standards. What we've been thinking about is more of a code of conduct that's really about setting a normative standard for technology developers, for creators, and for platforms. This is work that's led by Claire Leibowitz. And, it's sort of implications for privacy from a different perspective. We think of the use of deep fakes that take advantage of an individual's appearance and voice to potentially cause very harmful or dangerous misinformation. And then in other cases, we know are deployed for satire or art. So we have a code that has been developed after a series of consultations. It's out for public advice and feedback. We're looking for the most diverse and broad feedback possible in that particular area. And then another area is with regard to some of the recommendations that we've been partnering with other organizations on for conference organizers around how to promote and build a culture of ethical AI. So what are some of the ways in which we can establish norms and how we organize conferences? What can we learn from each other as different conferences in the research world take this on? This is work that's led by Madhulika Srimakumar at PAI. So lots of ways, specific ways in which to engage, but also broader ways to engage with us as well. I always encourage people who are listening to any of these panels to just take the time to try to find those individuals, those unusual suspects you would not normally connect with from different disciplines, from different organizations and institutions, and find space to be in conversation. Look what we can learn from each other. And if you have any questions specifically about PAI, don't hesitate to reach out to me or visit the website.
Thank you, Rebecca. And it's so true to have those different disciplines together. Like at the panel right now, we have technologists, policymakers, policy people, and legal people. And I think that creates great synergies. And it's super, the work that your organization does. And I hope folks who are listening to this do engage, as you just said. I want to circle back and give everybody on the panel an opportunity to say what they might have taken away from this panel, anything that they want to leave for folks who are watching it. And I'll start with you, Peter, because you are working in this area, and definitely some of the things you said really resonated with the rest of us. Any thoughts that you have as we close out our discussion today?
I think Rebecca's call there, this is a multidisciplinary problem. And finding ways to build bridges between communities as we tackle and even try to understand it. I think one of the things that continue to amaze me as I immerse myself more and more in this space is how often the thing that I thought I knew was not really, I didn't really understand the problem initially, right? And I think you only get that understanding and those different perspectives by reaching out and connecting with different people. And so I think if I had a takeaway from this is that really finding ways to build bridges between different people with different interests, those unusual suspects, as Rebecca calls them, and just getting to better understand these challenges, and then figuring out how we bring our individual skill sets and how do we anneal that, right? How do we go through that annealing process so that we have technology, policy, and we can combine those things in trust frameworks? And how do we build that in a structured way that is actually something that we can share and establish as templates for others to follow? I think the big takeaway for me is just the multidisciplinary nature of the challenge.
Thanks, Peter. And I really like the way to use the word annealing, that we're taking something and we're making it stronger by pulling these different threads together, different strands together and making something stronger. I really like that. Cornelia, you started off setting the foundation for what's going on in the policy world. Having listened to Peter and Rebecca, what are your thoughts going forward, and any suggestions you have for folks who are watching?
Oh my God. I mean, so much of what Peter and Rebecca also contributed resonates with me. In particular, this issue around that data protection rules have been very subject oriented or data subject oriented, singular or person oriented, while often we're looking at problems that we need to solve that really are community problems, societal problems, or parts of society problems, demographic problems. And that's one of the areas, I think, where legislation, fundamental rights legislation, unfortunately fails to offer solutions. So I think there's a lot that needs discussions around that. The way I think about this often is, I want to have a hologram that allows me to look at this from all angles, coming from all these different thoughts, because you always look at a problem from what you know, what your background is, and so that just underlines what both Rebecca and Peter have been saying, that it has to be multidisciplinary, not only to get the expertise, but also the perspective where people are coming from. And I think one of the biggest mistakes often, at least in the policy making, is that people are just starting from where they are coming and go down that path and do not look at all these other ways you can look at the same problem or issue around data. I want to offer eventually just one additional example that came to my mind when Peter was talking, where these tensions often are important. And I think there we need even more research in the privacy field, which is age verification, which continues to be an increasing topic around the safety of children, but is difficult to overcome without going into intrusive technologies or disclosing more data around the children. So I think that is another of these big examples of where we need to think about solutions in the privacy enhancing space. So with that, I hope to see a lot of the research coming, and I'm offering just as Rebecca to help get these conversations going, at least in Europe.
Cornelia, you made a great point that this is it's like a hologram. You got to look at it from different angles, and sometimes it's easy not to look at things from angles you're not familiar with. As policymakers, I fear that sometimes happens in the policy community. And what the research community can do is can tap the policy community on the shoulder and say, look at this side of things. Don't go down a dead end. And I think that's really a call to action for the research community to provide that input to help move the conversation from getting stuck in a rut and only looking at one side of the three-dimensional problem that we have today. So that's very valuable insight. Rebecca, I'm going to leave it to you to close out. You've got a lot of background in this, a lot of exciting stuff going on, the partnership on AI. Tell us how we should leave this session thinking.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, first and foremost. Cornelia, I will absolutely take you up on that offer to work more closely together in thinking about the EU. And I look forward, Jeff and Peter, to continuing the conversations we've started today. I guess I come back to reflecting on the question of trust, which is, I think, the umbrella for this particular panel and the focus that we had looking at privacy. And it is that holographic sort of image that trust happens in so many different dimensions. We're all thinking about how do we deploy trusted technologies within governance and frameworks that allow individuals, allow peoples and societies to flourish. There's also the question of how do we build trust as a community of individuals interested in this work? How do we better understand different perspectives and different points of view and connect that together as well? So I think I'm left with the real feeling about how important it is to build trust both as a community in order to therefore build trust in the systems that we are keen to see deploying to really advance positive outcomes for the world.
Totally. It's really an important time, I think, right now in the intersection between the research and the policy areas in privacy and AI. And it's exciting. So I want to say thank you for everyone for joining. We know we're all around the world, as is the research community. This has been a wonderful conversation. I learned a bunch, and I hope I get to continue to work with you on these issues as we move forward. Thank you very much.
This concludes the Building User Trust track at the Microsoft Research Summit. Thank you for taking the time to join us today, and we thank our speakers and panelists for the valuable insights. We hope that the talks and panel discussion you've heard today give you a new perspective into the role that research is playing in building trust in technology, in ensuring that we can take advantage of the benefits of AI while protecting the privacy of our users, advising and helping to comply with regulation, securing our digital identities, and helping our users to understand how their data is being kept secure and private. And as new domains are opening up, whether it is the decentralized future offered by Web3 or the new possibilities offered by augmented and virtual reality, we need research to ensure that trust is considered and built into systems as they are being designed. The research presented today represents just some of the many projects Microsoft Research is investing in to earn and maintain people's trust in technology. In fact, we're investing in a broad array of projects in the trust space, from research on making sure that users' data is protected and kept private, to making sure our systems are secure, to research on secure hardware and minimizing the root of trust, making sure that our software is trustworthy, and designing ML algorithms that detect fraudulent behavior, among many others. We take our responsibilities as a technology leader and innovator seriously. Our approach begins with an acknowledgement that to continue to drive technology and research breakthroughs, we must consider the impacts of technology on people, businesses, the environment, and society overall. We recognize the responsibility and accountability this places on technology companies, and we're committed to doing the work to continue earning people's trust in technology. To learn more about our research projects related to trust, privacy, and responsible AI and other areas, please feel free to connect with any of today's speakers. We hope you enjoyed today's sessions, and we look forward to connecting at another Microsoft Research event soon.
That's a wrap for the 2022 Microsoft Research Summit. These few days have been an opportunity to step back and discuss the impact we hope our work will have on the world. It's exciting to come together like this for the kinds of conversations that happen whenever thoughtful people gather and engage. We hope that these discussions and collaborations will carry on throughout the year. See you next time.